In New York City's Flushing neighborhood, recently arrived Hui Muslim migrants gather for a halal dinner provided by a local Hui businessman. They entered through the southern U.S. border without visas, seeking political asylum.
Okay, so today we're gonna be going to China. We're gonna start in New York and then we're gonna go to China. We're gonna be looking at Muslims in China and how they're experiencing some would call persecution from the Chinese government. They're being monitored. Their mosques are being destroyed. Well, not really destroyed, but the Chinese government says they're trying to make it Chinese. So that means removing the dome and things like that. We're going to cover all that. Before I begin, please consider liking, subscribing, and let's go back to the video in New York.
China's Hui community experienced less religious scrutiny in the past compared to the country's persecuted Uyghur Muslims. But stories from recent migrants suggest a shift. They do not want their names used to protect their families in China from possible retaliation.
Okay, before we continue, let me just give a background. Background is there are like two main Muslim communities in China, the Hui and the Uyghurs. The Uyghurs are the ones that back in 2014, they were under a lot of persecution. They were being taken to these labor camps and all those things. In China, at that time, they were being seen like the bad Muslims, for lack of a better term, like the bad Muslims. The good Muslims were the Hui. Now, the reason for that is back in 2014, there was like a terror attack that was done by, I guess, Uyghur Muslim believers, and that caused the Chinese government to start cracking down hard on them, saying that it was cracking down on extremists. Now, later in the years now, even the model Muslims, in quotes, the Hui, are now starting to experience the same thing. So in this video, mostly we're going to be looking at the Hui Muslims, and these are the ones that are covered in this clip. So let's continue.
Police will check your phone. Your photo, a message, social media. If they find something about religion, have a big problem.
This man says government officials were dispatched to his home after they discovered him and his wife practicing Islam.
For example, the morning, some people come in home and read and watching me and my wife and my family watching. Who speak what? Who do what right now? The right? Okay, 4 times or 5 times they came my home and sleep in my home. We can't pre-open.
Chinese authorities deny allegations of oppression. In a statement to VOA, they said, "The Chinese government safeguards citizen religious freedom in accordance with the law. All ethnic groups in China enjoy the right to religious belief as stipulated by law. There is no such thing as religious interference in China."
Yeah, that's quite a statement that you'd expect from a government. But if you believe that, I have a bridge to sell you. But let's continue.
But according to China expert Professor David Stroop, religious repression in China has been extensive over the past decade.
Starting in 2014, we see a move to securitize Islam, which means that the government is taking steps to place restrictions on religious practice.
Stroop says more Chinese Muslims are seeking refuge after a recent escalation in government control over religious expression.
So in particular, in 2023, there was this big clash over a mosque that was being renovated because it was deemed to be in an illegal building style. And people sort of clashed with local police. And that led to a lot of people sort of fearing that there would be extra repression.
Back in Flushing, these migrants live in close-knit quarters and rely on community support for clothing and food.
Okay, so that's really like the video. It shows that these Hui Muslims who are being persecuted, that they had to basically crossed the border illegally. They went through Mexico, they entered America, and now they're in New York looking for asylum. I did a video of illegal Chinese immigration. I'm gonna link it at the end of this to see how they enter America and how they find employment. But now let's go to this other news feature, which was now done in China, where they were interviewing the Chinese Muslims and seeing their point of view of how the government is cracking down on them and what's really happening. Oh, and before we continue, this is from Sky News, and I believe Sky News is owned by the same people who own Fox News, so take it with a grain of salt, just FYI, because Fox News is the biggest peddler of misinformation, but just know that in the back of your mind as we watch this.
There is a pocket of north-central China where faith is everywhere you look. In a country so culturally secular, Islam's road has been one of resilience. The people who live here are known as the Hui. They look and speak Chinese. They are integrated on the whole, but their worship, their lives are changing, and there is an uncertainty here. In a dusty corner of rural Ningxia, we find a small mosque with just a handful of worshippers. Lao Hai and his neighbours have a long history here. They remember what has gone. The dome, for instance, that once stood on this roof.
They said no Western, no Arabic styles are allowed. We must build Chinese-style mosques.
You wish it was still there, though, do you? Would you prefer it if it was there?
Of course I wish, but a wish cannot turn into reality.
Okay, so that's really what's happening. The Chinese government is going into these different mosques. They have done it to, I think, like 2,000 mosques by now. They just go in, they remove the roof. If you know how a mosque looks like, they normally have the dome. They remove the roofs. They remove the Arabic writings. They put Chinese writings so that, that they're trying to make it Chinese, basically, to make Islam Chinese. That's what's happening. Now, I'm not a Muslim, and clearly I'm not a Chinese, but I'm just covering this topic because I found it interesting that there are these millions, over 10 million Muslims in China with different experiences. Some were experiencing more discrimination than others, and now it's going like all public, like they're going to their mosques and they're removing the domes, they're removing the writings. But let's continue with the video.
People are a little upset, but you can't do anything about national policy. It's the country's policy, and you have to obey.
But it's not just the buildings that have changed here. There's a presence, a paranoia too, of another all-powerful force.
In our mosque, there are papers about the party's law. They are on the table, well placed. The party regularly teaches policies.
All around this village, there are hints of what's happened. Remnants of Arabic signs ripped away, secular pillars where minarets once stood. At one site, the mosque has gone altogether. And everywhere was eerily quiet, small clues that mosques were even still open. This mosque is similar to so many that we've seen here. It's not closed, but a little quiet. There isn't much Islamic architecture left. And look up here, there's a document that lays out the rules and regulations about being a good imam in China. At every site we visited here, party doctrine was presented, sometimes in the most prominent of places. And in all the towns we went, the picture of destruction was the same. We visited 26 sites in total and analysed nearly 40. Of those, over 80% have had domes or minarets removed or buildings destroyed. Sites like this in Linsha. First, its Islamic features removed and a Chinese-style roof added later. And elsewhere, moves to close or consolidate. At this mosque, the prayer hall demolished completely. For many, though, buildings are the least of their worries. Instead, it's the future they fear. Children are now largely completely banned from mosques like this.
Maybe 10 years ago, would you have had writings like this in a mosque?
The deputy imam here didn't want to show his face, but it is etched with a sadness for what that might mean.
In our childhood, let me tell you, there were 200, 300 in one mosque. Now there's not even 2 or 3. It's not a good feeling. It feels unnatural. In the past, there were many students and imams. The religion was living, and now it's like it's dying.
You get a sense here of just how important people's religion is to them. It's so steeped in their culture and their history, and people have largely accepted some of the changes here because they're broadly quite subtle and quite incremental. But it is reflective of a broader trend, and it's happening across China. The encroachment of the state and the attempt to control anything or anyone deemed to be different.
Now I'm gonna continue covering Chinese. I'm gonna do more episodes on Chinese religion in China, like for Christians and Muslims, because the government is very hands-on over there. They're monitoring everything. It got extremely tough, especially in 2014 after there was some terror attacks, as I mentioned earlier, in China. So they were tracking the Muslims. They were following them in everything that they were doing, basically. So I'm going to keep on doing a couple of series, I think, as we continue watching. Please, of course, like, subscribe.
The state has been clear its aim is to make Islam more Chinese. This internal document states the need for Islam to adapt to socialist society. And mosques, they should be tearing down more and building fewer. But authorities are clearly still anxious. We were followed and watched as we worked. This interaction felt too dangerous to film, but an unidentified man is threatening to call villagers to attack us. Ma Huiyun is Hui, but lives and works in America. He can no longer travel home, but he can speak more freely about what's happening and why.
Communists are trying to justify all this suppression in the name of national security, in the name of patriotism, in the name of modernization, in the name, of course, of Marxism. Without eliminating religions and beliefs, you really cannot have loyal subjects.
There have been pockets of opposition, like this last year in southern Yunnan, protests over the removal of a dome. But so many more are just trying to get by. They know too much talk carries danger. Arby's home is basic. Her husband works away. Her reluctance to criticise common. But she does feel stuck between the rules of state and religion.
Do you think it's fair to say that it is more difficult to practice Islam in China than it used to be, say, 10 years ago?
Certainly it's more difficult, she says. It's not okay if we don't worship. It's not okay if we do worship. It's not okay if we do nothing.
So that's really what's happening, that even when they're during Ramadan, they normally fast for a month. There's fasting. So during Ramadan, the Hui Muslims, for the most part, they were allowed to fast. But there was a time that the Uyghur Muslims were not allowed to fast. The Chinese government was saying that, they're going to be very tired if you fast. But really, it's because they did not want the Uyghur Muslims to fast, because the Uyghur Muslims are the ones who are being put in the labor camps, and they were considered like the bad Muslims. But let's see just maybe one more minute of this, and then we are done with this clip.
China says it respects religious freedoms and that it takes seriously the protection and renovations of mosques. Many here told us they do feel proudly Chinese and are happy as long as worship's permitted. But it is unclear what the end goal is and how far this policy could run.
Man, I think I'm going to stop it right there, because I'm surprised. I'm surprised. I don't mean this in a bad way, but I'm surprised that the Chinese Muslims are allowing these renovations to take place. As far as I know, it should not be that easy to just go into a mosque anywhere, basically in the world, and start removing the dome and, changing stuff. I don't think it will be that easy. But apparently it's being allowed in China. That just shows how much the Chinese government has power, that they can go in, remove the dome, and do all these renovations on places of worship and not face huge rebellion. But I think I'm just gonna stop the video there. This was not meant to be an attack on Muslims or anything. It's just covering the news. And if you like this video, please consider liking, subscribing, and of course share this on all the networks. I'll see you.
Oh my goodness, all the networks! Wow! All the networks!